When you partner with Axon, you immediately gain access to a full range of products and solutions designed to meet the complex needs of today's grower. We carry all major brands and sizes of tires and wheels. We specialize in large diameter wheels for large equipment. We have one of the largest OEM replacement wheel inventories in North America. Known for extreme flotation setups, duals, and triples, we have wheels for all makes and models of tractors, sprayers, combines, and grain carts. If we don't have the wheel in stock, we'll custom build, sandblast, and paint in-house. There isn't a more vast inventory in North America dedicated to helping dealers move more iron. With facilities on the West Coast and in the heart of the Midwest, leverage our 230,000 square feet of indoor inventory to solve any problem a grower may have. Move more iron with Axon.
Moving iron.
Hello and welcome to Moving Iron Podcast. Markets with Shawn Hackett. Shawn Hackett is with Hackett Financial out of Boca Raton, Florida, and he's nice enough to come on and talk about what's happening in the marketplace. Shawn, how you doing this morning?
Good, real good on a Friday here, and excited to get to the weekend here. So,
yep, everybody's working for the weekend. Song about that, good times. All right, man. So, a few things coming up here. We obviously have a report coming out today. USDA stock report comes out today. Thoughts on that as we go into that? Are you expecting any big fireworks up or down either way here, Shawn?
we usually don't. They usually wait till January if they're going to make some final drastic changes. I mean, they're free to do anything that they wish, but I really don't think it's going to be a market-moving report. Obviously, what's most important right now is Brazil weather, and I think if they trade the report, they'll trade it for 1 hour, and then they'll trade weather again. I just think that's where we're at, but I'm not anticipating this being a big market-moving event, unless they break character and do something in December they don't typically do. So,
yeah, okay. As you take a look at some of these factors that are out there right now, let's talk about Brazil for a little bit. We brought this up before we got started that the last time we had something that looked like this scenario that we're in was 2015, 2016 timeframe, looking at the vegetation health and just, the overall kind of aspects, what the market looks like. As you take a look at this, Shawn, what are some of the comparisons that you're seeing between this crop in Brazil now currently and then what you saw back in 2015, 2016?
Well, remember, in 15, 16, we had hot, dry in the north, extreme wetness to the south. It's a very unusual combination. And really, prior to this year, 15, 16 was one of the driest in the north and one of the wettest in the south. And now, of course, we're seeing a drier north and a comparable wet south. So I think it's important to kind of look at where we are now versus where we are then, because we know back then soybeans ultimately production turned out to be down 10% total production. And I believe corn production was down about 25% total production down. So that's what we had that year. And that's, pretty significant shortfalls, certainly for corn. So, there's a lot of ways you can look at it. You can look at rainfall. You can look at temperatures. I mean, we look at that. We can look at subsoil moisture, and we can do that. I like to look at this time of the year is look at what's the vegetative health look like. Satellite takes a picture and it has an algorithm that it kind of measures what's healthy, what's not healthy. It's not perfect, but at least you're comparing apples to apples from one year to the next. So what we did was we went up and we looked at the north and said, okay, Mato Grosso, how's Mato Grosso vegetative health at this moment, as of last week, look relative to the same time frame in 2015-16. Mato Grosso looks similar, meaning we're almost at an exact same vegetative health. There is a distinction, however. were still rapidly falling, whereas in 15-16 we were actually
coming back
like
out.
seeing improvement.
Yeah.
So, you know, and then looking at the weather this week, you know, we're going to probably continue to push that, which means the next vegetative health comes out once a week, by the way, is probably going to be lower. But bottom line is we're comparable right now. Now that represents 26% roughly of total soybean production. Then if you look at Mato Grosso do Sul and Goas, those are the two other areas just to the periphery that grow an additional 30%. They're actually worse, solidly worse in those two regions. So when you put all that together, and they're also on the decline where they were rising back in 15-16. So safe to say at this moment in time, we're overall modestly worse on the vegetative health, and the trend is still down versus up. What really surprised me is the South. South is being rain after rain after rain after rain, and usually rain makes grain, and the market doesn't get excited about too much rain. But I was expecting to see similar, nothing too different, and I mean they're way off. I don't have I can't, not sure why, but I mean if you look at Parana, which grows 15% of total soybean production, and you look at Rio Grande do Sul, which grows 15% of total soybean production in the South. Both those regions, if you look at them individually, the vegetable much more than it is in the North. To me, that could be the big story here. If those vegetative health continue to show crops developing at a worse rate than they did, because remember in 15-16, what really helped the crop only be down 10% was the South helped, bail out the North, the poor production in the North. But if the South is going to be considerably worse than 15-16, and let's say the North is similar, which that's the way then we could be looking at total soybean production down considerably more than 10%. So it's something we're going to watch every week and monitor it to see if somehow we catch up all of a sudden. But it's not just down by a little; it's down by a significant margin. And I just found that to be shocking, quite frankly. I wasn't expecting to see that. Mm-hmm. It's an objective data. It's not my opinion. It is what it is. That's what the satellite's saying, and that's what it said. It's the same algorithm, no different. So very interesting. Something is different this year in terms of what's happening with the crop in the South versus the North. And I think that if there could be even though the market won't react to wetness in the South, it could be that when they start rolling the harvest, they start the plant, they start harvesting the crop down there in January and February. We could be very, very surprised that we get shockingly poor results coming out of the field, and we have to quickly make adjustments. Something to pay attention to, because we're not too far away from rolling the combines to harvest the crop down there, and it's just so anyway. I think that's something that probably is not being talked about much by too many, and I just think to me, I think that's where a big surprise could come from. I think it's fairly safe to say most people recognize the North is in trouble. They're going to be down considerably, but most people, there's no real example of the South getting into too much trouble with wetness. But if the vegetative health stays this poor relative to 15-16, you're not going to have the same outcome at all if we don't turn this around. I mean, turning it around like the next 3-4 weeks, it has to turn around, because this next 4 weeks is mission critical to developing yield for soybeans. And so definitely a very important metric to watch going forward, in my opinion, probably the most important metric to watch. Weather is weather, but what's actually happening on the ground is the most important thing. Yeah. So
we'll have to remember in a couple of weeks to check back in on that and see what that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I would say with 2 to 3 weeks, we need to take another look at it. And do we just have a dramatic catching up, or all good, or we're continuing to fall further behind the 8 ball? So that definitely would be something we should update within, let's say 2 or 3 weeks for sure.
Right on. Okay.
So,
all right. let's jump over and talk about India for a little bit. So we've talked about India quite a bit, that their opportunity for having some down cycle in their 7-year run that they've had of great crops over the last, this last time, that these last couple of years, there's an opportunity for them to show some weakness in what we've taught in their overall production. And we're starting to see that come through now. There were 3 articles in a row about what India was going to do and how they were going to handle some stuff. They're worried about disruption in their ethanol production for their blended gasoline. They're talking about the limits that they can extend exports on rice and wheat both this time, and usually it's just one or the other. And we're also seeing some just overall wheat stockpiles as a whole start to come down. You talked about this, I think, a couple weeks ago, where India had, they're planting their wheat now, and they're going through that process, and they are having one of the worst starts ever. So I guess, Sean, talk a little bit about what we see happen over in India.
Yeah, they're off to an awful start. Now, an awful start doesn't mean a bad finish, but they're not off to a great. This is not encouraging. If you're worried about food inflation, you're worried about a critical food item for 1.3, 4, 5, 6 billion people, whatever the number is. Who knows how many people are actually there? But this is not what you want to see. A bad start. You already were worried about supplies. Supplies were already tight. You're already seeing prices taking off, and now you're off to a terrible start. There's the big debate about India is India restricting exports of all these crops, whether it's rice, wheat, sugar, cotton. Are they doing it because of it's an election for an election advantage? Meaning, is it politically driven, or is it supply demand driven, or is it a little bit of both? I think certainly when you have high food inflation in a country that size, there's going to be a political component. It means you got to get those prices down when you're coming up for election. So there certainly is a political component. But then the second question is, why are prices rising so much? Why? If they had so much wheat and rice lying around, why would the domestic price be taking off? It says that there's a shortage, or it's what you wouldn't see domestic prices taking off. So I think it's a combination of both. But if their wheat crop continues to have adverse weather and they come up significantly short on their wheat crop yet again, boy, that's to me sets India off into a different gear. I think because they held everything back last year, saying, okay, we're good, we're gonna have some better crops now, and now they need to have them, and especially wheat if they don't have that. Now you remember wheat and rice compete for the same mouths to feed, and if your wheat comes up short, now your rice demand domestically gets even higher. They already have a ban on non-basmati rice, which they don't eat domestically there because it's too expensive. But so that in terms of food consumption crisis, for a country as large as India is, that could remember we have this working theory that India, who's been a large exporter of agriculture for a very long time, is in the process of becoming a permanent importer. So what could this mean? Last year they just stopped selling stuff to people. Step one. Step two is buying stuff from people because they don't have enough domestically to keep food inflation down. So that would be the next stage of a potential food crisis in India, is that they start to see them buying wheat from other countries in large quantities, buying sugar from other countries in large quantities, having to actually bring it in. Forget not selling it, now actually bringing it in. That's the next stage that could be on the table in the first half of 24. If that starts to happen, Casey, then wow, we are going to enter a very, very interesting time for the ag supply demand food chain globally. And if Brazil comes up short on corn and soybeans, as they're likely going to come up short, we're still trying to determine to what degree, but if they come up short on corn and soybeans, then we are in a pickle, because now you have the largest exporter of many, many ag markets in Brazil saying we're gonna export a heck of a lot less, and you're gonna have India potentially importing product in when they're supposed to be exporting product. Then there's the China factor, which once ASF, hopefully, knock on wood, once this ASF round completes, and the decimated hog herd has to be rebuilt, they're going to need a whole lot more feed. And so I could see them starting to buy more feed in the second quarter. Remember, Xi Jinping came over here and got all kissy, huggy, huggy. So we're all friends again. I think he knows he needs to buy a lot of grain from us because I think he sees what's going on with India. I think he sees what's going on with weather in Brazil. And I think he knows that he can't. And it's an election year for us, which means silly things can be done. An export ban during an election year to show we're strong against China would not be out of the question. I think he's doing everything he can to make sure that is not the lever that's pulled because he needs our grain. And so that's a very interesting dynamic that could play out here as we move through the first half of 24. Yeah. And then what does all that mean? The U.S. has to have the big crop. And it's not going to happen because La Nina is going to come back for the middle to the back half of our growing season, which means hot, dry finish. Doesn't mean a catastrophe, but it means below trend, low to mid 170s, upper 40s, on soybeans. And while that's not a disaster, in a situation like that, if that's what plays out, Casey, that is not going to cut it in terms of what people are going to need from us. They're not getting from Brazil and they're not getting from India. So that's the potential setup here. We also have the prospects for interest rate cuts by central banks across the world that are going to try to stave off a recession or improve it as they go into elections. Money printing is going to come back because somebody has to buy all this debt that's being issued, and you're not going to do it by raising taxes in a recession. So all these factors, make 2024 a very, very, very interesting year for commodities. Remember, we've been essentially declining in overall commodities for the better part of the last almost 2 years now, year and a half to 2 years. And it looks to me like 2024 could be where we turn that trend back up and go through a second wave or the second stage of commodity inflation, the first wave being the COVID response-driven first phase, and then the second phase would be, the one we're going to be entering into, more traditional on money printing, weaker dollar, the more traditional and actual supply shortages. In post-COVID, it wasn't that we had supply shortages as much as we just couldn't get the supply.
Couldn't get it around.
Who wanted it because everything was just all messed up. Lockdown. So
it was crazy. That was a crazy time. As you painted a pretty good picture there of the fact that, assuming that the United States can put together not even a trendline yield, even if they did put a trendline yield in, what's your thoughts on that? If that did happen, if they did come through and get trendline yield, and we had not a bumper crop by any means, but we had a pretty good crop.
Well, if we delivered trendline yields, I guess it would be around 180 corn, give or take. I think that's what the USDA would put it at. I think trendline on soybeans, I think it's around 52. Right. Maybe it's around there. I think if we had trendline yields, that would certainly would I think be enough to prevent a panic. It doesn't mean it would be enough to prevent shortages or higher prices or the need, but I think it probably would be enough as long as we're willing sellers to offset an outright panic. But I don't, it wouldn't be enough to create a surplus or an oversupply or a bear market. It just would take the top off a panic cycle. What could be a panic cycle? Because if we come up 10 bushel to the acre short, or 5 to 10 bushel acre short on corn, and we come 3 to 5 bushel to the acre short on soybeans, like we've been doing the last 2 or 3 years, then it's panic time. In my opinion, that's a panic situation, because that would not be enough. And then the domestic market here in the U.S. would be competing for, it'd be pretty wild situation. So, I hope for trendline yields because I don't want to see humanitarian crisis in the world, but the chances of having a trendline yield with a rapidly ending El Nino and a rapidly rising La Nina at no later than midsummer, the chances that scenario is going to produce trendline yields, not impossible, but highly improbable. I mean, the probability is that we're not going to be able to do that. That scenario that I just said does not mean disaster crop. If the El Nino hangs on, there's a lag effect, and you get some El Nino weather that kind of transfers into the first part of the growing season. It staves off a Gleisberg cycle potential, which is really, as we talked about before, we're going to be watching that timing. How quickly does the atmosphere respond? Does it respond in late spring? Does it respond more in the mid? We're going with the conservative outlook that by mid-July is when a La Nina is going to be very active in the atmosphere. We're going to have a hot, dry back half of the year. That's the conservative outlook right now. And we're, if we see a quicker atmospheric response to La Nina, then we'll start shifting it to the right, meaning shifting it earlier. And the more we shift it earlier, the more those yields could be compromised. And so, if we have a hard freeze in the first half of May, which is our forecast, that the probability this year is probably the greatest in 20 years for a, first half into mid-May hard freeze for a good portion of the northern and central grain belt that will have likely planted a lot of corn for sure. And of course, what that would mean for winter wheat, potentially, that adds an extra element because now you're going to have to replant a lot of stuff and you're going to push out pollination. You're going to push out pod setting further out into what's going to be a La Nina hot, dry weather pattern for certainly the central west, central north grain belt. So that, that would also increase the risk for yield. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And, those are the signposts, that we're going to be monitoring. And, if we miss this, all right, then, everything is up. We always try to tell everybody, you have, it's a working document, and you shift and you shift and you shift. You have a general track. It's like sailing, the wind's going to tell you how you're going to get to the location. You're going to get there, but the path is not exactly certain. But if the wind shifts, then you shift your course and alter it accordingly. And that's what you have to do with anything, with any long-term or intermediate-term forecast. But right now, that's what we're looking at, and those are the things to be watching, the risk points to be seen. But it not every year has the potential for this. You can't sit here and every year and say that this is a potential scenario. It is absolutely possible what we just said. That could be the scenario that plays out, and that's why every signpost that verifies you're getting closer to one of these things, and the markets will start to react more and more and more once you pass the point of no return into these signposts. And that's why we lay them out there for people to monitor and watch and follow, so they themselves can also get a handle on what's happening and where the things are shifting to the left or to the right. So
lots to pay attention to, man. This is going into 24th. So I've had this conversation several times with folks, but it's just it's a different kind of feel. I don't think many people are overly concerned about not being profitable, but it's just what's that profitability look like, and what do we have to do to make that happen? And I think 24 it's just so much uneasiness out there. One story is always different than somebody else's, and typically when you go into this time of year, when you're looking at into 24 to the next year, the storyline's basically the same. There's just a few additional characters in there someplace else. But this year, there's a million different storylines and a lot of characters thrown in the mix. So it's an interesting time for sure.
We absolutely right now don't even know who really is going to be running for president.
Shawn Hackett.
I don't know if
Shawn
Trump
Hackett
will be. We don't know if Trump will be allowed to run. We don't know if he'll get the nomination. We don't even know if Biden will remember to run.
That's a good point. Yeah, right.
If they'll allow him to run. I mean, it's a crazy situation. We're here less than a year away, and we really, really, really don't know who's actually going to be running for president. I don't think anyone could say with high confidence that Biden is going to be running. I don't think anyone with high confidence can say that Trump's going to be running. Maybe they are, but no one can say right now with high confidence that's going to happen. Since it's an insane situation.
It is very, very odd. This is the first time going into a presidential election in my lifetime that I can't tell you definitively who's going to be at least going through we know who's going through the preliminary cycle with on the Republican side, but like you said, the front runner, quote unquote front runner, he could be in jail and get elected from a cell someplace. So it's crazy. But you read today, I mean, to me this is a good indicator of what's happening there. I mean, Hunter Biden got indicted on 9 counts of tax evasion or fraud or whatever it was he was doing. So I kind of feel like, yeah,
it's a complete it's a complete mess. It's an absolute mess. If he does run, if they feel he can win, whatever the opponent is, I personally believe they're going to put in someone at the vice presidential level that they want to be president. So if he gets elected, all of a sudden he had a sudden health problem and he just can't run the presidency anymore. I mean, I hate to think this way, but I almost feel if he runs, they're really going to be searching for the vice president to really be the president, because they're only going to have him there as a figurehead because they think whoever he's going against that he'd be able to win, even though he doesn't really have his cognitive abilities.
For sure, I agree. Totally agree. And I've thought about that same scenario myself a few times. So it's yeah.
You have to think about it. I mean, anyone that's looking at it who's not thinking about all these different scenarios, you have to be thinking about it because it's absolutely possible. That's the way. Look, people in politics, they're going to do whatever they have to do to win. And as unsavory as it sounds that they're going to take someone that has a mental illness, which is very sad, by the way, and use him as a puppet to get an election. I mean, they will do that. They're ruthless. They don't give a shit. They will do that. So
with everything they've got, and they've proven that over and over and over again. So
yeah. So I would not hold it back that that's the playbook. They will do that, and then all of a sudden they will find the doctor will say, oh yeah, he had a sudden stroke. I mean, whether he does or doesn't, it doesn't matter. They'll say he had a stroke or something, and he can't be the president anymore. And then who they really want to be will be the guy that comes in, or the girl that comes in as vice president, whoever they pick.
Yep. We will definitely see.
We'll see.
All right, Sean, good place to stop. Folks want to reach out to you, get more information about what you're doing over at Hackett Financial. What's the best place to do that?
Our website is Hackett, HACKETT, advisors.com. We also have a Twitter page at Faradix11. We have a LinkedIn page. From time to time, we put interviews on there, some tidbits of information that go over our outlook with climate and prices and such, so that people can take a look at how we look at the world in agriculture to see if what we do might be of value to those that listen.
Sean, appreciate you being the podcast, man. We'll talk to you next week. Right on. I'm Casey Seymour with Moving Iron Podcast. Thanks. Check me out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Where else? At Moving Iron LLC. Go to LinkedIn at Moving Iron Podcast, TikTok at Moving Iron Podcast, and Snapchat at Moving Iron Podcast. Go to the video version of this on the YouTube channel, which is Moving Iron Podcast YouTube channel. Shocker. I know it's blowing your mind right now. Check that out there. Go to movingironllc.com for everything Moving Iron related. And if you're listening to this on a podcast, you can find it on that particular place, but you can also find it at Spotify and Apple Music or Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. And, the list just goes on and on and on. So check that out there. Any place you can find a podcast, you can find the Moving Iron Podcast. So check that out. So with that, I am Casey Seymour with Shawn Hackett. Be smart, folks. Out.
Moving higher in the 21st century. Hard